Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of All Access AM. Happy Monday to you guys. I am Billy Embody. We are excited to have a really great show for you guys. We get to head over to Clemson and look at their football program in spring football as we continue our spring tour around the ACC of sorts. And we'll have Larry Williams of Tiger Illustrated joining us in just a moment to do that. We'll also have James Fletcher of On3 on as we'll break down the NCAA tournament that first weekend. But look, despite March Madness rolling on here, we are going to lead off with the heavy hitter in Larry Williams. But before we do that, our Monday show as always, is presented by our friends at Security National Bank. Security National Bank is where you can find that intersection of a family-owned business that still has that small feel where everybody knows everybody, and you're seeing them grow. You're seeing them tackle all of the things in the banking and wealth management world that you want to see them tackle as they continue to expand, watching them open new offices here in the DFW area. So make sure you guys give Security National Bank a call today as they can handle your personal, your business banking like they bank for us on our business side of things. You can give them a call, 402-344-7300. Appreciate Security National Bank for all they do for us here at All Access AM, and appreciate all our friend Larry Williams does covering the Clemson Tigers as they have quite the spring storylines going on. And Larry, good morning. How are you?
Morning, Billy. Doing great. Hope you are as well.
Yeah, doing great. Good Monday here, Sweet 16 for the NCAA tournament later on this week, but spring football in full force. And for Clemson, it is really something that I think is met with maybe a little bit of optimism as Chad Morris returns, but also plenty of questions and kind of pessimism as far as maybe can this actually work with Dabo Swinney and Chad Morris reuniting?
Yeah, the biggest source of pessimism, I don't think it relates to Chad Morris and his sort of overhauling of the identity, the offensive identity, bringing more aggression, more of an emphasis on getting the ball to their playmakers, more spreading the field horizontally and vertically. I think the bigger source of pessimism is the situation at quarterback. They stood pat at that position, and that was a unilateral decision by Dabo Swinney after the departure of Cade Klubnik. He believes they have what they need in the current quarterback room. That, of course, includes Christopher Vizzina, who's been here for 3 years and who doesn't really have much of a body of work save for his impressive showing last fall in emergency duty, replacing Klubnik after Klubnik missed that game to injury, even though Clemson did lose that game more because of his defense than anything. But it's a gamble, I think, and I guess maybe both the positive and negative of this particular issue, this particular question, this offseason is there will be no doubt who to credit if things go well and Clemson's offense is productive in Morris's first season as coordinator, and there will be zero doubt as to who to blame if it doesn't work, if it does sort of blow up in their faces, and that'll be the head coach, the Hall of Fame head coach who's won 2 national titles. He's done it his way in a lot of situations, and this certainly is included in that because I think there was a lot of clamor to go into the portal for a quarterback, not just from outside the program, but I think there were quite a few folks inside the program who believed that they needed to do that as well.
Let's dive into that quarterback competition. You mentioned Christopher Vizzina returning. We had an up close look at that impressive performance against SMU in that home game. Just was able to really rip it and let it loose. I mean, Chad Morris has talked about wanting to take shots down the field. We know Clemson in the past has had that impressive wide receiver talent to, in theory, do some of that. We haven't seen it as much in the past as maybe we should have, but Christopher Vizzina, he's got that big arm. Chris Denson, is that talented, maybe dual threat. Break down kind of the pros, cons of going with each of these guys.
Well, the pro with Vizina, you would think, is that he's been here for he's a veteran, right? You would think he would be sort of cool, calm, and collected, even though it is his first season in a new system. Um, he would have that sort of institutional knowledge of just situational awareness and things like that. Chris Denson, I think the pro is what he showed last year, late last year when they put him in late against Furman when the game was essentially already decided, and he just was a dynamo with his legs, and that was something that insiders had been seeing in practice for much of the season. The con to Chris Denson right now is still a lot of developing to do as a passer with his footwork and such, just the mechanics. Also, of course, just processing things quickly enough to perform. And so, honestly, I think if you want to reduce it to two names right now, I would include I would sort of put a freshman in there above Denson in the form of Tate Reynolds, who came in as a mid-year guy and who, man, goodness, he is more developed than most kids are after 3 or 4 years of college, and he can spin it. There is no doubt that he has the most velocity of anybody in that quarterback room right now. I'm certainly not saying that Reynolds is a finished product or anything close to it, but I think it's a big question right now is, how long before he pushes Christopher Vizina for that job if he's not already? Probably too early to say. They're only 9 practices in with a new offensive system. A lot of what they've done so far has just been, drinking through the fire hose of installation under Chad. And so still a ways to go, but here I am talking on Monday, and they have their spring game on this Saturday, March 28th. And so the off season is long, but in this case, it seems kind of short because Chad Morris is trying to do a lot of different things, trying to identify talent, not just at quarterback, but particularly at quarterback, which, they just need a lot of answers this off season, I think, as they prepare for a pretty daunting challenge in their opener at LSU.
Look, Larry, I think this Chad Morris offense is going to be so intriguing to watch. And you mentioned the spring game. Is that going to be televised? Are we going to see some Red Bull on TV somewhere, or are they kind of holding this closed like we're seeing a lot of college football do?
I could have missed something. They haven't determined that yet, I don't think.
Yeah, it's what a world we live in. Yeah,
kind of late for to not have a resolution to that. I think at the very least you could have their in-house multimedia operation televise it or broadcast it video-wise. But you will. I don't think it'll be just the people who are there in person who see it. I think there be that ability. There will be that ability to watch it, and heck, maybe they'll use it as an opportunity to sell subscriptions to they call it the Clemson Plus option, as just like everybody everywhere, they're trying to maximize every revenue source they could possibly have.
And the thing about Tate too, I will say, does he still have the blonde hair that he has from his recruiting profile picture? Has he ditched that? Was that?
Yeah, honestly, I've only seen him.
Yeah.
I've only seen him with a helmet, and as I mentioned earlier, the thing that catches your eye with him is not the hair or anything like that. It's the arm. He can whip it. I find myself gravitating to him when we are permitted to watch practices, and we will be later today. But again, not saying that he's a finished product. He certainly needs some polishing, but that part I think catches the eye of everyone who observes practice, and it'll certainly catch the eye of everyone who watches the spring game on Saturday.
How's Chris Johnson Jr. settled in? I know he came in with a lot of kind of hype and all of that? And how's the offensive line looking up front? And trying to, I think, kind of fix that group that didn't perform maybe the way it should have at times in the run game in particular.
Johnson is certainly one of the shiny new toys that has brought a lot of intrigue. On one hand, Dabo kind of not raised some eyebrows, but had an interesting observation early during spring when he talked about Chris Johnson has not spent enough time devoting himself to off the field, preparing his body in the years that he played the game before he arrived here. And the fact that Dabo, who's pretty calculating, like he doesn't say something, without some, ulterior motive, so to speak, like publicly. So he's not going to say that publicly about Chris Johnson if it's not a pretty significant part of his mandate behind the scenes. And so I thought that was interesting, just trying to get Chris thicker, more ready for the long grind of a season. But everybody you talk to says, okay, this is the perfect type of weapon for a Chad Morris offense because he's not just a running back, right? Like Morris is not going to use him. I'm not going to pigeonhole him that way. And I think Rhett Lashley as well, he's such a creative schemer. So there wasn't the lack of that with him at SMU, but I just think at Clemson, part of their offensive rut in the last few years was just not totally utilizing what they had. You had Antonio Williams, who was an excellent slot receiver. You had questions at running back last year. In my opinion, you didn't move him around enough. Maybe you didn't use him at running back enough. There were some other examples of that, Chris Denson included, maybe not getting him more involved during some spots, including against that SMU game when they came in with like a 5-play running package for Denson, but only used him for 1 play. But I really think that it's a really good fit as Morris tries to sort of reestablish Clemson's offensive bona fides as, being aggressive and stretching the field and making defenses have to account for, every blade of grass, the width of the field and the length of the field. As for the offensive line, I thought going into the portal cycle that they needed 2 offensive linemen, particularly a tackle. They ended up going after 1, ended up striking out on those prospects. So it was 0. And so consequently, given the loss of Blake Miller and Ryan Linthicum, the center, and Tristan Lee and a few others, you're going to have to rely on some inexperienced players. They do have some very talented, promising figures returning, but I think that they brought in a really good freshman class last year, and then again this year. I think they're going to maybe have to have a couple of those guys really elevate and become, significant contributors for them to have the type of production on the offensive line that they really need to fulfill probably the biggest mandate that Chad Morris has is, okay, we're going to run the dang ball, right? And so everything sort of flows from that, whether it's the play action passing game or just all the different options that are available to you, and then the horizontal RPO stuff. If you can't run the ball, it's going to be very hard to attack defenses the way that Chad wants to.
And with Tom Allen, he's back for another year. He's got to replace so much. Of course, losing Peter Woods, DeMonte Capehart, Stephylon Green. I mean, the list goes on there. What have you thought about how Clemson's been able to respond to those type of moves that need to be made, and what did we see on the defensive line that is kind of coming up, and hoping you're feeling a little bit better about that group long term?
Yeah, they did really well in the portal, I thought. Got Marcus Strong, tackle from Oklahoma. Courtney Kelly, another transfer, interior guy. Kelly actually suffered a knee injury their most recent time on the field back, I guess, 12 days ago before they broke for spring break, and so we're still sort of awaiting word on that, on whether that's a long-term injury or not. And if it is, it'll be a big blow because Tom Allen really spoke highly of Kelly and Marcus Strong before that injury. You have also really at one point, kind of highly regarded guy in Vic Burley, a returning player who they're really hoping that the influx of transfers really sort of gets his attention, and boosts his level of play. Also, Amari Adams, who a freshman last year, who is a very special talent, but he only played about 100 snaps, in part because he suffered an injury late in the year. But I think you really hit on it. Like, that's the area you have to be good, and differential the interior defensive line if you're going to have a really good defense, I think. And they were supposed to be that last year. Like they were, with Peter Woods and DeMonte Capehart, that's, and Stephylon Green, who's now at LSU. This time last year, I was sitting there saying, oh, they're going to be truly elite on the interior, and they weren't. LSU was able to neutralize them in the opening game, and they were inconsistent from that point. So I think, as I look at it big picture, with these transfers, not just on the defensive line, but also on the back end, Tom Allen is not just looking for talent. He's looking for hunger and desire. And, Dabo's homegrown approach, it can produce those things, of course, but I think it's also true. One of the big revelations of the last year or so has been, hey, transfers can bring that too, because often the reason they're leaving a place is because they weren't getting the playing time they wanted, and they bring a real hunger and a chip on their shoulder, and that elevates the competition inside that locker room. And so I think that's been one of the biggest differences so far, with this defense as a whole, has been the influx of talent that can play right now, and it gets the attention of guys who thought they were elevating to a starting role or a significant role maybe, and it's like, well, yeah, not so fast if you're not going to elevate your level of play to be more consistent.
And correct me if I'm wrong here, but Clemson went out and addressed the secondary a little bit in the transfer portal, and was able to bring in a few players from what I understand. And is that correct? I mean, did they bring in
Oh
some
yeah.
guys that you feel like can really upgrade that secondary? Because it's weird, you see all the hype around Avion Terrell and some of the guys we know and watch come up in that program for that secondary, and it just seemed like last year they were on different pages at times.
I think you hit on it. Different pages. Poor
Yeah.
communication between the corners and the safeties. Lack of experience. You had Ronan Hannafin back there at safety. Really, his first time playing major snaps. Khalil Barnes, who's now at Georgia, was hurt early in the year. Just got off on the wrong foot, so to speak. Right now, they look different. Like just sort of walking off the bus, thanks largely to transfers. You have Corey Myrick and Jerome Carter on the back end, two long guys with speed, and they really lacked speed on the back end last year, I thought. Also, Elliott Washington, Penn State transfer. He's a corner who will be taking that role vacated by Avion Terrell. And Clemson is already really good on the other side at corner, with Ashton Hampton. Washington has had 10 interceptions we've picked up through 9 practices. So there's some positive and negative to that. The negative, of course, is, oh boy, what does that say about the guys throwing the passes? But I think by all accounts, Elliott Washington, he's legit from everything we can pick up. So I just think that like I said, talent that comes in and is ready to play, I think that has a lot of benefits, and I think Tom Allen is pretty happy with that. In addition to just the speed that they've added and the length that they did not have last year on the back end.
And it's it's a tale as old as time. It's the same with the offensive line and defensive line. Okay, if you're seeing the offensive line get beat up, is that a sign of a good defensive line, or is that a sign that the offensive line is just in complete shambles and the defensive line isn't really that good? Or the same thing, with the offensive line getting a push. It's always one of those things where you're looking for how realistic does it seem like they're doing the things that they need to be doing in the secondary and making those plays and all of those things. But there's also new scheme. Obviously, you lose a veteran quarterback in Cade Klubnik, but you also lose, a couple really talented receivers. What's the battle like between that secondary and receivers? Just if you kind of take off, kind of where the passes are going, I guess.
Yeah, and in the offense's defense, in the quarterback's defense, I think this has to be said. The offense has been shorthanded through spring. I think Clemson is not unlike a lot of schools out there that experience a lot of attrition during spring practice, and particularly the first half of spring practice, because the long season brings injuries that require surgeries that they're still recovering from once spring practice rolls around. And so Clemson, that receiver, even though they lost Antonio Williams, they bring back two big retention pieces, Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore. Neither of those guys have been out there because they're recovering from injuries and surgeries. And so, you also subtract Cole Turner, you subtract Tristan Smith, who is awaiting an eligibility resolution that comes this summer, but who is still out there practicing. You also subtract a couple of tight ends who have been a little banged up, and you get really thin in a hurry. And then you also take out some of the offensive linemen who haven't been available, and there ain't a lot of help for the quarterbacks in their defense. And so to your question about what do those battles look like between the pretty veteran, talented, energized DBs and some very young mid-year enrolled freshman receivers who are still just sort of swimming mentally and would be swimming anyway, even if it weren't a new offense. But yes, this is a new offense. And some of that becomes more explainable, the high volume of interceptions. And so I don't think it's been a fair fight so far. And I don't know that it will be a fair fight between now and the spring game. You might have to wait until August camp to truly get a maybe a precise read on those battles and what they mean.
Larry, we know you're a busy man, especially with spring ball for Clemson winding down already. We'll get you out of here on this. What are the biggest things that Clemson has to accomplish as, the rest of the offseason now arrives? You're talking about it's not even going to be April, and you got to go April, May, June, July. What are you going to do with yourself?
There's plenty to do. Always something to write about and talk about in these parts. I think the biggest question is I don't think these offensive coaches are under any illusions. I don't think they think they're going to have a Heisman Trophy quarterback or, in 26. But I guess the positive part is they don't need one for this offense to go. I think they believe they have enough playmakers, to be a viable, formidable offense. And so it becomes a question of can they get just good quarterback play? They just need to get the ball to the playmakers. Obviously, sort of a corollary to that is, well, you still have to run the ball, and that means you still have to block. And so, so it's not just on the quarterbacks. But I think, if you're asking me 9 practices in, what is sort of the biggest long-term question? It has to be quarterback. It simply has to be, just based on the reviews that we've picked up, based on the feeling right now that, oh, man, this Tate Reynolds freshman mid-year guy, he might be able to push Christopher Vizina. Nothing against Vizina. I don't want to be unfair to him, but that doesn't really speak well for Vizina, that you're not really hearing reviews from practice of, oh, yeah, he's really, showed separation. Again, it's kind of complicated because they're in install of a new offense. And so you want to be fair to Vizina and to all of them. But as you're asking me what I'm going to be writing about in April, May, June, July, a lot of stuff on the quarterbacks for sure.
Well, Larry, we appreciate all the time on this Monday morning, and always appreciate your insights over at tigerillustrated.com. The best of the best when it comes to Clemson. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for the kind words. Appreciate you, Billy.
Of course. There he goes. Larry Williams, a legend covering Clemson there and giving the goods. So appreciate him for stopping in with us on this busy Monday morning for him. And appreciate all of you guys who have tuned in. We just rolled off with a little bit of Clemson conversation in this era of March Madness that is upon us still. And we'll have James Fletcher here in just a little bit to break down what has happened over the first weekend of the NCAA tournament. The ACC, just one team remaining in March Madness. And that means for one fan base, there is one team left out of our viewership on the ACC side of things that'll be plugging in with Sportsmo. Our friends at Sportsmo continue to bring it for you guys that are trying to help in so many different ways. Get your athletic departments, get your basketball, your football teams well funded and in good shape for the upcoming season and beyond. Sportsmo is a way you can do that. You can make your micro donations based around how your team plays on the court, on the field, wherever. So make sure you download the app today and find out kind of what it's all about. Invite your friends to join, create your groups and more as you enter the home stretch of the NCAA tournament, and just get it ready for football season.
College basketball hits different with Sportsmo. You tap, they score. You pledge, they drop a three. You give as a group, they win as a team. At this point, you're not watching a game, you're in it. Download the app, fund your wallet, and get in the game. Download Sportsmo. Power the play.
That's right. Power the play with our friends at Sportsmo. Appreciate them for supporting all we do here at All Access AM. Had a comment in the chat. Wolf Doggo says, "Bro, where's the SMU hype? Slow and low energy live streams." Well, look, we're gonna engage with the chat first and foremost, as we always do. So whether it's good, whether it's bad, as long as you're not a bot, we're gonna say something. But look, if you're a subscriber on the SMU channel, this is All Access AM. We're live Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, 8 to 9 a.m. Central Time, bringing you guys kind of the latest storylines around the ACC, kind of catch SMU fans and, of course, all sorts of fans up on what's going on. We try to do it in a way that you get pieces of information that can help you as you're following the ACC. We try to keep it current. So, for example, we had Larry Williams on. He talks about Clemson. We'll have James Fletcher on, and he'll talk about the NCAA tournament. One is more big picture. How's Clemson doing? How are those things working out? And James Fletcher will handle really that current conversation around maybe ACC basketball and the NCAA tournament. I'm sure we'll talk Gerry McNamara getting hired at Syracuse, his alma mater. But really, All Access AM was something that was born now 6 months ago almost. So we've been around for a minute, Wolf of Doggo, and we'll continue to cover all things ACC. And trust me, there are plenty of SMU notes on this podcast, but generally we try to hit around the ACC with the news of the day and the news of the week and things we want to react to. And for me, it helps me pay attention better to the ACC when I've got to prepare for this. So if you're looking for the SMU hype, we have been releasing on the SMU channel on the Pony Express our spring position previews, going bit by bit with Hayden Howerton and breaking all that down. We've reacted to the end of basketball season. We've had probably about 5-6 podcasts in the last 7 days or so. So, and tonight, Hayden Howerton and I are getting together and recording all the defensive ones. So we'll be doing more live streams on the SMU side of things as we get into probably season. We'll do some mailbag. I do want to do more live streams that are just solely on the SMU channel. But also, once you do live streams, you really want to be consistent with your time. So you want to be there at the same time every Wednesday for lunch, something like that. You don't want to be popping in and out. You'll get all sorts of not random people, but your people that are listeners. They'll be like, "Oh wait, I would have loved to have been there." Well, they don't know because you're just popping on a live stream. So we record a lot of our podcasts on the SMU side of things, and meanwhile we go live on All Access AM. But trust me, I'm right here for you if you have anything else. And James Fletcher is just entered the studio where he'll have all the latest on the NCAA tournament. And we'll get to Gerry McNamara, I'm sure, because everybody had their eyes on that Duke Siena game in round one. That was quite the interesting time there for the Blue Devils there for a minute. But James Fletcher, how are you? Good to see you on this Monday morning.
Yeah, good to be with you. Good to have one weekend of NCAA tournament action in the books, and now we get to kind of recap it and figure out what went right and what went wrong for some of these teams.
Let's start here. An NCAA tournament team in Siena going to be on the hunt for a new head basketball coach as Gerry McNamara has been hired away to his alma mater. He returns to Syracuse, a coaching search for the Orange that, was publicly probably not a mess because I still think they accomplished what they needed to accomplish in the timeline they needed to. But nonetheless, the conversation around some of the reasons why some of the other coaches maybe didn't get interested enough or didn't make that move, but they land with a guy who certainly loves Syracuse, and they get Gerry McNamara, who has led a revitalization of Siena.
Yeah, it's always going to be a ding on your kind of search when somebody publicly turns you down, especially when there's a reason linked to that. There's a direct cause other than just, I love the school that I'm currently at. So it was kind of a big deal for the Brian Hodgson kind of information to get out there, and then for him to not take the Syracuse job, end up at Providence in the Big East ultimately by the end of the weekend. But landing Gerry McNamara, I think, is something that's going to take time to figure out if it was the right or wrong move, because right now it's easy to kind of look at and downplay it because you think the Jim Boeheim era, yes, it was great. It was so long, sustained throughout multiple eras. But then once we came up to the NIL, the transfer portal started to get going, he kind of lost his fastball a little bit. We saw that. We saw Syracuse kind of fall from that kind of position they had at the top of the sport and slowly kind of drift down. Well, of course, he ends up retiring, and they go with an alma mater. They go with someone who was on his staff, familiar with the program, somebody who could, in theory, kind of keep things going. Unfortunately, things were going the wrong way. They weren't heading the way that they had wanted them to be. And so to go out and replace that hire with another guy who fits that exact same mold, an alumni who was on the staff and then ends up taking his own head coaching career. Now, the difference that we will note here is that he has taken over a different program and led them to success. So I think that's, if you're looking for the bright spot, that's it. But it's easy to pick apart right now. But as we know, Gerry McNamara, he has all of the accolades that you need to check the boxes in order to get this job. This isn't just an alumni hire. This is somebody who, like you said, cares about the program and has the resume to have a job like this in college basketball.
What did you see from them against Duke that, maybe excited you, or, if a Syracuse fan is thinking back on that game and saying, oh, wow, they were right in it with Duke in the first half, and how they were able to, step up and be at that level for a minute there. But just overall, what you were able to see at times with Siena this year, what should Cuse fans be excited about, I guess?
Yeah, I thought the biggest thing, if you're a Syracuse fan, that you get excited for from that NCAA tournament game in particular, is just his ability to get the team up for the big moment. His ability to game plan head-to-head against one of the best coaches in college basketball. Of course, it's going to look very different. The roster makeup at Syracuse should be different from the way that he builds a roster at Siena. But we know that his recruiting track record was good while an assistant at Syracuse. So we know that he's got the recruiting in his background. We know that he's been able to land the type of players that he's going to be going after moving forward. And then you saw the X's and O's be lined up head to head with one of the best in the business. And of course, we saw him kind of outcoach and be able to get the most out of his roster throughout the entirety of the season. That's what you saw from the Siena team. Yes, we can get into kind of the strategies, but I think a lot of that with any good coach, and him included, is kind of roster dependent. I do think he will run some different things when he's at Syracuse. I think that he's adaptable enough with the roster that he's going to have that you're going to see some fun basketball. Now it's about, can he translate fun into winning basketball? Will he be given the right resources, the right amount of time in order to get those jobs done?
And we'll be tracking that and see how he puts together his roster and all those things on All Access AM. Transfer portal does open April 7th. Of course, Syracuse, they have to combat maybe some of these guys leaving, all of those things, as they did have that window where Red Autry was let go. So they're in that window right now as far as players leaving, but now they have somebody to meet with, go after these guys and try to keep the ones they want to. Obviously, it's going to be a crazy transfer portal cycle again for college basketball, but we'll leave that for another day. What is not really been so crazy in a sense is this NCAA tournament. A lot of high major basketball moving on, controlling this NCAA tournament. We're seeing these rosters that are playing just a certain way that mid majors kind of used to play. I know that's been a big talking point in a sense, but what else has caught your eye as we have now moved through the round 64 and 32 for this NCAA tournament?
Yeah, I thought one of the things that caught my eye and caught my attention was this conversation about the Cinderella story. And of course, Texas being an 11 seed, one of the biggest brands in college athletics overall, not just basketball, but we all know the Texas brand, the Longhorns, that burnt orange. And so they don't feel like a Cinderella, even though what the run that they're making lines up with some of the recent Cinderella stories that we've been telling. This is the same path that NC State took forward into the Final Four just a couple of years ago, and we all got behind it. A lot of fans started to feel something. They felt like DJ Burns and the rest of that roster, Kevin Keats, they were all something to kind of get behind. Now, the difference, of course, is that Texas just invested in a new head coach. They just invested in kind of moving forward into perennial contention. And so to see them make this run, it feels like maybe it's more of an indication that they're headed in the right direction, more than it is that there's some Cinderella team that we can all get behind and root for. Yes, the number of mid-majors that advanced was significantly down, continues to be down over the last year or two. I don't think that Cinderellas are entirely dead, but Todd Golden made a good point, of course, before getting upset by an Iowa team in the second round, that some of these top teams are not just spacing the floor out and shooting a lot of threes. Yes, that's still a big part of the game, but they're also creating their advantages on the interior. It's about the analytic shots, not just the three-pointer, but also at the rim. Can you protect the rim on defense? Can you score at the rim on offense? And as we see the transfer portal funnel some of this talent into the top teams, it allows them to stack those areas and makes it harder and harder for these mid-major teams to challenge them. It really means that the mid-major team has to go to that three-point line and try to use the strategy where 3 outweighs 2. We saw High Point do that successfully in the first round. They weren't able to get the job done against Arkansas in the second round. And really, there weren't a lot of those success stories around the rest of the bracket. Maybe that's a sign of what's to come, at least until the style of play gets updated again. We know that that's a rotating thing in basketball. It's a copycat sport. Once you see someone have success, you kind of follow it. Right now, we're seeing Florida with a bunch of bigs win a championship last year. Michigan having great success the last couple of years with a big supersized lineup. And so I think that's the trend right now. And that's just harder for these mid-major teams to match up with, to get that amount of talent and size on the interior. I think it's a little bit easier when the other team is spacing it out as well. You get a bad shooting game from them, you get a good shooting game, and that kind of evens the playing field. So, yeah, the three-point shot has been blamed for a lot of things in basketball, but I think it did open the door quite a bit more for Cinderella teams over the last few years.
Look, the ACC has not done probably what it wanted to in this NCAA tournament. I would say, watching this league and seeing how it unfolded now in March Madness, what we saw was kind of that the take out Duke, right?
Mm-hmm.
That everybody else was kind of middle of the pack, like solid teams, but they faced a lot of these Big Ten teams. Clemson falling to Iowa, who just knocked off Florida. You show the talent that they have. Nebraska, not Nebraska. VCU beating North Carolina is a huge upset. A really, really disappointing result for Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
But Carolina was flawed all year. This league just seemed like the middle of the pack of it was kind of somewhere between, okay, if they play to their potential, look, they can go on a run. If not, we're seeing what we're seeing. Like Miami, I thought should have gotten more credit for beating Missouri, but ultimately then the next round they get to play Purdue. So it's been an interesting run for this ACC conference, the ACC, and I don't know how they fix it, but disappointing result in weekend one?
I don't think there's any question that the ACC took a step forward this season. And I know that the NCAA tournament results are disappointing. They'll make you reflect and kind of think back of what this could have been, or is this just another sign that maybe they are further off than we thought? But don't forget, the last few years, it had really become Duke in the NCAA tournament, and then North Carolina. Hopefully they're having one of their good seasons, and then they would be in the field. Clemson was kind of the next best bet. We knew they were going to be in the NCAA tournament. And then it was just one, maybe two other teams that kind of caught fire at the right time, or had a coach through the door who got something moving in the right direction. We didn't see a lot of progress in building up the numbers, though. That's what we saw this year. Yes, they didn't make deep runs, but they got the numbers into the NCAA tournament field. And I think what's most encouraging is that we saw a lot of coaching turnover over the last year. We're going to see a couple more jobs kind of change hands in this cycle. And what we've really got here is the starting point of an investment. We're seeing the ACC go all in on some of the best coaches in college basketball. Now, retaining them is also part of that. And we'll see which jobs open up over the course of the next week or two here in the college basketball cycle. But I think that the ACC has undoubtedly invested into the coaching ranks. The next step is to build up the roster, to continue to throw resources at that area, the development, all those key pieces around it. And as we know, when you make a coaching change, that's a big chunk of your budget there. You're going to have to pay the buyout of the coach who's leaving, pay the buyout of the coach who you want to bring in, give him his salary, bring in an entire staff. So maybe you don't have quite as much NIL that you're throwing around. That means the next year, if you can show them signs of growth, which we did here in the ACC, we saw more teams make it into the field. We saw those teams get more kind of momentum through the regular season, build up the strength of the conference. Now, can you invest in the roster and take that next leap, get that roster into contention where they can beat those Big Ten teams, beat those SEC teams, make it into the second weekend of the NCAA tournament? That's where we're kind of trending towards here. And you hope, if you're the ACC, that it's a similar path that we saw the SEC take a little bit over half a decade ago when they really started to invest. You saw these SEC programs start to land coaches that just hadn't been around the league before. And you start to then see some of these programs that have been struggling, that don't have a lot of history being really successful, at least recently, start to get things together, start to trend in the right direction. And now some of those teams in the SEC have become perennial contenders. So you hope that's the path that you're on if you're the ACC. I haven't seen any indications that they're not on those paths, at least as a whole to this point. We'll see how the investment continues to trend up.
Look, we're now going to scatter shoot, but you bring up a key brand that comes to mind when you talk about that. North Carolina, Hubert Davis, as of this morning, 8:45 a.m. Central Time right now, no decision made yet on Hubert Davis's future. Our guys at Inside Carolina, among those watching it very, very closely. But this is a brand name in college basketball that was not good enough for the talent that they had this year, I think, as a whole. You know, their fans aren't satisfied. We saw the ups, we saw the downs. We saw the great Seth Trimble game to help beat Duke and things like that. But, you know, at the end of the day, you lose in the first round of ECU and you do it blowing a 19-point lead. It's kind of an inflection point type of moment for the Hubert Davis era, just 5 years after a national championship. And it feels like this truly feels like kind of Ed Orgeron LSU in a sense, but in a longer timeline, because they've been able to still make the tournament and do all of those things. But they lose that game to VCU, a really, really disappointing result. And I think, as you mentioned, the chunk of money that would have to come out, it's wild to me to watch this unfold, because they're talking about, okay, what are they doing with the Dean Dome? Are they going to, rebuild something? Are they going to go fire a head coach? And then, oh, by the way, they got to do NIL. They got to go out and hire a top tier coach. Carolina's just in a weird spot right now.
They are, and this is kind of the spot that you tend to end up in. I've heard throughout my time this kind of words of wisdom every time that there's this will they or won't they fire a coach. And it comes from, I can't remember the exact source, but an AD throughout history and what they had kind of mentioned, and it's been relayed over time, and eventually it's something that I've heard in college sports in particular. And that's, if you're an athletic director, the first time that you think about firing your coach is when you should probably fire your head coach, because at that point, everything that happens from that moment forward either is prolonging or is slowly moving towards that decision. And so that's kind of what we've seen with Hubert Davis. He's saved his job a handful of times. Now, maybe they were going to give him more time early on in the process, but we've seen him miss NCAA tournaments. We've seen him miss the NCAA tournament, returning the #1 preseason team in America, something that had been a historic failure to that point, especially for UNC. He was the first UNC coach to lose a 5-star commit as a recruit. And then it felt like every time, though, he would bounce back and get exactly what he needed. He makes a deep run into the NCAA tournament after not a very successful regular season there. He then ends up having another up year the year after. He hits a couple times in the transfer portal. He hits on a big recruit in Caleb Wilson, hits again on a good point guard in this upcoming class in Mingo, coming off of a year where they didn't have great guard play. So every time it has felt like he has answered and gotten just enough momentum back behind him to get things headed back in the right direction. We'll see this upset loss. Is it enough to kind of change the mind of those people in that room? It seems like they're really drawing out this decision. And I think if you're drawing it out this far, you're probably best off pulling the trigger, because you know that UNC brand in particular is going to draw big names. You're not going to be hurting at the head coaching position. Yes, maybe you have a year where you go down a little bit in terms of the investment that you're able to make, the amount of money that you have in your budget. But I think you immediately return back to the top once you do resolve all those issues. Unfortunately for Hubert Davis, it just has not lived up to the historical standards of that program here in his tenure.
I think it's going to be fascinating to watch what they do in this scenario. And to your point, look, if you're talking about firing your coach 1 year, you're probably in the right spot at that moment. You need to go ahead and find a way to raise that money. Very few times, I think maybe Dabo Swinney, he was kind of like on the hot seat early in his career in a sense, and made the change and hired Chad Morris and did all those things, and they went on to become the program they did in football. But man, I can't really think of too many basketball type of programs that are really looking back being like, man, thank goodness we didn't can that guy.
And to that point, you mentioned Dabo Swinney making investments into that program. That's kind of what pushed things forward. Yes. Well, this past year was a big investment by that UNC program. They were kind of using this season as the test case. That's kind of the new way to do things in college sports in particular, is that you look at all these buyouts, and now when you can invest that money in the roster, you spend 1 year where you just throw it all at the players and say, okay, get it done with this roster. That felt like the last season for UNC. That's what was supposed to happen this year, and they still lose in the first round to VCU, blow that big lead. It feels like it's probably the time to make the decision, but him being an alum, him being so beloved, him being honestly just such a great guy in that community is going to make this so much harder than it otherwise would be.
Yeah, and it's you feel for him that it's in this spot, and like, you kind of see a little bit of that with like Red Autry and just kind of how it all played out. Like, it wasn't like immediate. It was a day or so after I feel like the season ended, but it was just one of those things where sometimes when you go back home, you're gonna eventually leave, and it's not going to be a good feeling. It's not going to be what you want. North Carolina, if they do make this move, they're going to have to, I think, go out and make a major hire outside of the Carolina brand, outside of the Carolina family. That's just my take. I don't know how you feel, and then we'll get back to the tournament.
Yeah, I do think that if you're North Carolina and you're going to pull the trigger this year, I think that you've got to understand what your pool of candidates are. We've seen in the past couple of years some of these blue blood programs maybe take a little bit for granted who they would be able to go pull. Just go ahead and get this guy out, and now let's figure out who's interested, because you just figure everyone's interested. Well, in the NIL era, you've still got to offer other things to these coaches. It can't just be, come to our brand, we are great. You've got to beat what the other schools are offering financially. You've got to put together the best packages, the best facilities, everything together. It's a complete package that you're pitching to these coaches, not just look at how many banners hang up in our building. And so if you're UNC, yes, I think you've got to have a short list. You've got to have kind of connections with agents, understanding which coaches would actually be willing to move if that job were to open before you pull the trigger on an alum who is beloved there. Maybe you do go one more year. If you can't get the support, you've got to have the support behind you. As we know, that's kind of the key of college sports here. We rely so much on investment from boosters. And so if you don't have booster support, it's hard to do much of anything in college.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And speaking of interesting, I mean, look, Duke is ACC's last hope going into Sweet 16 weekend. They have the third best national title odds as it stands going into the weekend. They do get a chance here, I think, to make their run even deeper. But man, St. John's looks so good over their first two games, in my opinion. I know that was a great basketball game against Kansas. I thought for St. John's to get that one done, that really showed maybe where they are. Maybe they're a team that could work some magic with Rick Pitino. I think we're in for a really good game between these two in the Sweet 16, and one heck of a, I guess, kind of two different coaches just in general, like one on one end of the spectrum, one on the other. But Duke, St. John's to kick off the Sweet 16. I mean, what are your early thoughts on that and how the Blue Devils are looking going into it?
Yeah, we're going to need to see, does this Duke team kind of return to form a little bit? Yes, they're without Caleb Foster. We haven't really heard any update, but it'd be pretty early on in the timeline if he were to return for this matchup. Pat Ngongba, can he get back into the starting lineup? Can he play a full kind of game of minutes there? Or is this going to be something that's more drawn out? Are they going to have to try to figure things out, continue to kind of piece together this rotation without two of their starters throughout this season that's been so successful? We saw them struggle against Siena. They kind of figured it out down the stretch. We saw them kind of put it together in the second half and really pull away in their second round game against TCU. I think that they're probably still the better team. I think they're the most talented team, but we're talking about Rick Pitino. And so, yes, it's going to be a really interesting coaching matchup, kind of the new blood of John Shire, the up and coming new era of coaches that are taking over across college basketball versus the old guard, Rick Pitino. Can he get it done one more time, continue to put together what has been a Hall of Fame career and add more deep runs to the NCAA tournament, knock out what has been the best team in college basketball to this point?
You know, when Virginia faced off against Duke in that ACC championship, they looked like a different team than they did earlier in the season against them, but they still end up falling to Tennessee in that second round. A disappointing result for UVA. Obviously, Tennessee, Rick Barnes, what they've been able to do is so impressive, but just wanted to touch on them briefly as, you know, the ACC's kind of number 2 team this year. What have you thought about Virginia, and how do they, you know, get this train continue to roll in the right direction next year?
Yeah, my word for them all season has been consistent. I've just loved the consistency that they put forward. You knew what you were going to get out of that group. You knew exactly what they were going to do. It felt like, generally speaking, when they were the better team, they won. When they were the worst team on paper, they typically lost. Now, this Tennessee game, I think it was pretty close on those margins, which way you would say who was the better team overall, but they do end up taking the loss. They're knocked out of the NCAA tournament, but overall a great year one, an extremely successful year one, I think, under Ryan Odom. And now comes that next step that we were talking about earlier in the show. Can they invest at that next level? Can they bring in a little bit better of a roster? Can they complement the pieces that they do have coming back? Because I think they are going to be a program that's able to retain at some level still. Yes, maybe not at the level that Tony Bennett was doing it when he was running things, but I do still think Ryan Odom is going to be able to get back some of his star players, be able to add pieces around them, and then we'll see. Is that roster going to be good enough to make it into the second weekend? Are they going to take that next leap, become a top 10 team in college basketball over the next year? That's where we're kind of watching for this next leap for Virginia and a couple of other programs across the ACC.
Let's go with this. We get into the Sweet 16, tons of great matchups, high seeds. What are the ones that are standing out to you so far as we, you know, wait now these matchups?
Yeah, we talked about that Duke St. John's one. That's the one that kind of it feels really interesting. Are we going to see this top seeded team make a run to the Final Four? This feels like a big test, a big kind of make or break moment for that run towards the Final Four. I'm looking at a couple of other ones, though. Arizona, Arkansas has been a crash course that I've been looking forward to this entire tournament. I think that we've got the consistency of this Arizona team. Don't forget, yes, they had 2 losses on their schedule. Those came in during the same week. So outside of 1 week in an entire college basketball season, this team has just mowed through whoever they've been in front of. I think that they're coming in with a lot of consistency. They're coming in feeling really confident. They seem like they're at just about peak health at this point against an Arkansas team that is riding Darius Acuff as far as he can take them into this tournament. He has been great to this point. Better performance in round 2 than round 1. We'll see. Can he take his game to yet another level? He's going to have to put up a lot of points for Arkansas to get this done. Malik Thomas is going to have to come alongside of him and provide more offensive firepower. But I think ultimately what it might come down to, in addition to foul trouble for Arkansas, they can't afford to lose anyone in that front court. They just aren't deep enough as a team in the rotation. I think what it might come down to is how much can they get from Darius Acuff and Malik Thomas on the other end of the floor? Are those guys able to stick in front of their guy on the perimeter? Are they able to limit at least what Braden Burries and Jaden Bradley are able to do? They're not going to probably stop them. Those guys just aren't elite defenders in that way. But can they play within the team concept? Because that's the next step for this Arkansas team that could really take them into national championship contention.
Do you have an updated national championship pick? 2 teams that are going to come out, or updated Final Four? Like, how you feeling there?
I'm still going Duke against Michigan in that title game. I feel pretty good about those picks. To have Duke coming through here, like I said, this next game is going to be the big challenge. Obviously, that next round is no small game either UConn or Michigan State. But that's when you kind of get to the gauntlet of it all. You know you're going to be facing one of the best teams in college basketball by the time that you reach the Elite Eight. I look at the other side, and Michigan is just rolling right now. They've got the bottom of that bracket is really interesting. They're going to face Alabama here in this next round. Alabama in this last game looked really good, just kind of dominating Texas Tech from start to finish, really putting that game away early last night. But I like Michigan to keep making their way through the bracket on that side. And I'm going to keep the same Final Four. I'm lucky enough to have all my teams still in the bracket here. Houston coming out of the South region, of course. And I've got Arkansas making it out of the Midwest, or the West, excuse me.
Awesome. Well, James Fletcher, good luck. Enjoy the games later this week. I'm sure we'll have you back next week, and we'll break it all down and see if Duke is still in the running for a national championship.
Yep, anytime.
There he goes. James Fletcher joining us on this Monday. Always appreciate his time with us. And look, we appreciate all of you guys who tuned in. And one last thing, we want to remind you about the magic of March Madness. Of course, we want to remind you about our friends at Corporate Magic. Visit corporatemagic.com. Learn more about what they can do for you and your business as they create events around the globe at an incredibly high level that are memorable, seen by millions, and from every step, from the design to the implementation to the post-event recap, all of the things they can handle for you. They've done it on the biggest stages for the biggest brands. They have decades of experience in this space, so make sure you guys reach out to Corporate Magic. Go to corporatemagic.com, whether it's a national sales meeting or a big event in general, they can execute it for you. So we appreciate our friends at Corporate Magic. They're, of course, I'm sure doing a lot in the space with the just NCAA tournament, things like that. So they're always having their fingerprints on the biggest events on the biggest stages. So visit Corporate Magic for more information on what they can do for you. Appreciate all of you guys who tune in to All Access AM. This Monday show, a fun one. Get to go into spring football, get to go into the March Madness, and 2 of the best, Larry Williams and James Fletcher, joining us. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys hit that subscribe button for me and help us out in that respect as well. So we will be back on Wednesday with another edition of All Access AM as we continue to give you guys a glimpse around the ACC and all things. So looking forward to seeing you guys bright and early Wednesday morning, 8 to 9 a.m. Central, 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Thanks for watching. I'm Billy Embody. We'll catch you next time.